In addition to wanting to make money off of all of this, which is clearly one objective of the Pearsons of the world and so on, the ideological view of what schooling is for, the choice component, and the pieces, I don't mean to say funding's not important, I just wanted to highlight some other components. Students with special needs, particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, are increasingly, quote unquote, clustered into particular classrooms. There's inadequate funding to provide special resource teachers for them or pull-out programs. So what they do is they put them all in one class with one education assistant and hope that everybody kind of manages to get by, which they do in some of those classrooms, and in others of those classrooms, the teacher's on stress leave, and that's not an unusual occurrence. In Victoria, we have, in a 5-year period, 1 in 10 teachers going off on stress-related leave because of the classroom conditions that they face. So there will be parents out there who think nothing's wrong, everything's fine for my kid. And no doubt it probably is. There are classrooms out there that are just fine for the kids in them. But for every one that looks like that, there's a mirror classroom somewhere else. For every class that's French immersion with, and my daughter was in one, 24 girls and 4 boys. There's another class out there with 24 boys and 4 girls, and I can tell you that it's a lot more difficult. Boys have a lot more energy, and it is a lot more difficult to teach in a gender imbalanced environment, as well as not being particularly healthy, I think, in a democratic society in terms of what our goals are for public schooling. Now, keeping that picture in mind, I want to get back to what Donald talked about in terms of a different frame. And I have a different frame, and I completely agree with what he's saying. And the frame I want to actually get rid of, not get rid of, but not focus on when we talk about privatization is money and funding. Because I think for a long time we focused on money and funding. And it's been about there's inadequate funding, we don't have the services, this is going to lead to a push towards privatization. And there's no question that that's true, but it's focusing only on that, I think, has been to the detriment of focusing on the other component of what public means. And I like to stress this because public is not just about public funding. And in fact, many of the advocates for private systems will argue that you need some public funding. Vouchers have public funding as a component of them. But the other component is about control, democratic control of schools. And the reason that charters, for example, I would argue are a form of privatized school is not because they're funded by private money. Charters are funded through public money. It's because they are privately controlled. The charter allows a different group to control it. It's not controlled by a school board. They don't have to necessarily follow the curriculum and so on. So I think that we do need to reframe things, and I think I have kind of 3 ways of reframing what I think the push for public education needs to look like. We have to focus on democratic control. We have to focus on equity, and that gets back to what I was talking about, a tale of 2 schools, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more because the choice and commercialization and treating what school your child goes to as a shopping experience really gets to the equity question. And then the third component is to really get back to this idea that public schooling is about a public good. And so differentiating the idea that it's about, I want the best for my individual child, and focusing everything that's good in society is when my child, me, my family, my individual self gets what I need, to viewing a more holistic, collaborative view that actually we live in a community, we care about each other, and what's good for my neighbor is good for me, and that I want what's best for everybody in my community, not simply what's best for me. And I think if you go back to the origins of certainly the public view and the public fight for public schooling, that was a major component of it, right? Healthcare and education. It was about the public commons, the public good. And that's not divorced from democratic control, they go hand in hand. A public good serves the public and it's accountable to the public, and that means that you have public control. And that means, for example, that school boards who are democratically elected by the entire community have a say in how schools run, as opposed to parents who are a segment of the community having more say, who are much more oriented towards focusing on what they as individuals or individual families need, as opposed to everybody having a collective say in what we as a community need. If you look back historically, the kinds of reforms that are promoting privatization were kind of a post-war, they were part of a broader kind of post-war ideological movement, neoliberalism. One of the main proponents with respect to schooling was a fellow named Friedman, who came from the Chicago School, and he wrote a very oft-quoted paper about voucher schools. And he articulated the neoliberal viewpoint quite well, and it has a very different view of the purpose of schooling. And I think sometimes you do have to go back to that very fundamental question. And so you do actually need to provide public funding, because if you don't, you'll have a strata that can't even get the basics. And if you go back to the origins of schooling, this was the case as well. There's always been a segment of the corporate class that's promoted public schooling because it's a form of corporate welfare in a sense, right? It creates the pool of people who are going to be ready to go into the workplace. The 50 years, kind of from the 70s onward, the rise of neoliberal ideas. In public education, this has been what's sometimes called the GERM movement, the Global Education Reform Movement. And a lot of what Donald described is that kind of the American component. But this reform movement is global, make no mistake. You can trace back pieces of its history, for example, to the paper A Nation at Risk. In the 80s at some point it came out, which was kind of the motivator or the rationale for the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, to promote testing on a broad scale. And in fact, that was kind of it was the germ of the germs. It was the origin of the idea that, we need to rank we need to rank education systems everywhere. We need to impose testing schemes, and through that we'll be able to impose reforms on those who are doing poorly. All sorts of other areas are part of this movement. Trying to diminish the role of teacher unions is a component. Any form of ranking, including ranking like teacher evaluation systems, or in New York City, they actually give schools report cards, and if your school gets a failing report card, they just shut your school. Make you move elsewhere. Some places they shut your school and then a charter opens. That's what they're doing in Chicago. So it's a way of getting rid of the public schools and replacing them with charter schools by, saying you're a failing school, you can't possibly exist. We need a charter to replace you. Underlying all of these, and again, it kind of goes back to the voucher system, is this notion of choice, and getting back to this model of seeing education as consumer-driven, or a very market-based model. And the testing is connected with it, because what happens when the Fraser Institute publishes their reports? Well, parents read it and they go shopping for their school. And again, it's a very individual-centric view of schooling. It's that your role as a parent is not to participate with others in your community about making schools great for everyone. It's about protecting the interests of your individual child, and the way that you're going to do that is by choosing the best school, the best program, the best what have you for your child, no matter if resources to support your program are being taken away for another program. Choice and the kind of mantra of choice is no stranger to us locally as well. And so I want to kind of come back, and we have this kind of global reform movement, but just as Donald pointed out how the superintendents are no strangers to Pearson, similarly our ministry and our local administrations are no stranger to pushing programs of choice, schools of choice, and mechanisms for choice. In my mind, the worst was the 2002 legislation which opened the catchment areas and which allowed parents to select the school that they wanted to put their child in. And this has had huge ramifications on schools. I mean, it has led to school closures, it has led to quote-unquote white flight out of communities. It has led to the kind of demographics I was describing through programs of choice like French immersion. It has led to, with the outdoor kindergarten, there were parents camped out to get in. Well, if you work, you were not camped out there to get your kid into outdoor kindergarten. It has led to a school fee model, and so we have quite a number, sometimes more than one at a school, of fee-based choice programs in our district. And again, I think we need to reframe it. A parent paying fees in a public program is a form of privatization. It is the private capital of that parent providing a superior service for their child within the public system. And all of these things have an impact on equity. You don't have a system that promotes or fosters equity when you allow certain people within the system to access better services than other people. And that is how we end up with a system with two sets of classrooms. With some classrooms that, yes, they look very good, they have great programs, and other classrooms that are really, truly struggling. Just a couple of points in terms of how we get there. We need a broad-based movement, but we do have to remember that the equity issue is there, and that means not every person is going to be on our side all the time, and we have to be aware of that. There's people who send their kids to private schools and want them to continue to exist, right, and benefit from it. So we're not a holistic happy family. The 99-1, there are divisions in terms of what we look at as a broad movement. We have a problem here in British Columbia, in Canada, with our political parties. In the last election, not one political party, in my opinion, had a platform on public education that was supportable. Not one of them has come out opposed to public funding for private schools. Not one political party supported reinvesting the $3 billion that's been removed from the system in the last 10 years. No party looks at skills training with a critical eye, saying, what is that really about? Is that about, corporate welfare where the school system creates workers for the oil fields? Like, not one, even questioned or began to question. So we cannot rely on political parties, and we have to be careful that we can't be within the stream of a political party and be part of that voice that downplays those very serious questions and puts us in the wrong frame, as Donald said. Ultimately, we have to look beyond reforms. We have to get to a place where we look as a society to say, we can't spend the next 100 years like we spent the last 100 years, which is every waking hour, yelling and screaming and fighting for the little scraps that aren't good enough. We actually have to look at the broader picture, I believe, in terms of what's the economic system we live in, what's our system of governance, and so on. Because the forces that want to privatize schooling are the same forces that want to, enact laws that support the 1%, that want to have corporate profits over public good, and so on. And I think absolutely, as advocates of a public system, we're well positioned to actually work with others and to start the conversation about how do we get to a place where we're actually talking about the wonderful things that we can be doing with our school system and with our children, instead of how to keep what meager bit we have left. So I look forward to joining all of you in that struggle and further conversation. Thank you.